Most people are alive in name only. They move, breathe, speak, and plan, but they are not truly here. Their eyes are open, but they do not see. Their hearts beat, but they do not feel. From birth, we are taught to chase, to compete, to achieve. But rarely are we taught to be still, to be conscious, to be awake. And so we grow older, but not deeper. We age, but we don't evolve. We build identities on top of silence, layer after layer of roles, beliefs, fears, until we forget the one thing that ever mattered, who we really are beneath it all. There is a kind of death more silent than the one that stops your heart. It is the death of presence, the death of knowing. It happens quietly, when you trade wonder for routine, soul for structure, truth for convenience. You go to school, you get a job, you build a life, and somewhere along the way, something starts to dim. You feel it, the weight, the numbness, the question you don't want to ask. Is this it? Is this what being alive is supposed to feel like? But what if the answer is no? What if you've never truly been born? Not spiritually, not consciously, not fully. Being born once isn't enough. Physical birth puts you in the world, but conscious birth brings you into yourself. That second birth is rarer. It doesn't happen in hospitals. It happens in breakdowns, in awakenings, in moments where the old story no longer fits, and you are forced to look at your life, not as something that happened to you, but as something asking to be remembered, to be reclaimed, to be rewritten from the inside out. This second birth isn't marked by celebration. No one brings flowers. There's no applause. It often begins in silence, an uncomfortable, unfamiliar silence that feels like something is missing. But nothing is missing. What you're feeling is the absence of illusion, the crumbling of false identities, the unraveling of who you thought you were. It feels like loss, but it's actually space being cleared, a doorway opening, and most people run from this. They numb it. They distract themselves with noise, ambition, validation, anything to avoid facing that still, echoing question inside. Who am I really? And so they keep living asleep, eyes open, heart closed, controlled not by chains, but by repetition. Conditioned patterns, inherited beliefs, borrowed dreams. They confuse comfort with peace. They think safety is the same as truth. But something deep inside never fully settles. A quiet ache, a flicker of remembering. It shows up in the stillness before sleep, in the way time feels strange, in those moments where you feel like a stranger in your own life. The system we're born into doesn't want you to wake up. It feeds on predictability, on roles, on routine. Awakening threatens that. It dissolves certainty. It opens questions. It makes you harder to control. That's why true birth, the kind that brings you into direct contact with your essence, is so rare. Because it requires courage. Not the kind that faces danger, but the kind that faces truth. The kind that sits with discomfort. That questions everything you've built. That lets go without knowing what comes next. And yet, this is where life actually begins. Not in the pursuit of what you were told to want, but in the return to what you already are. Before the name, before the role, before the story, before the world told you who to be. Something deeper was always there, watching, waiting, whispering. Come back. Coming back doesn't mean abandoning your life. It means remembering the one living beneath it. It means peeling back the layers, not to destroy them, but to see through them. The job, the relationships, the habits, the goals, they're not wrong. They're just incomplete when they're disconnected from soul. Because when your life is built only from the outside in, it becomes hollow. And that hollowness grows louder over time. Not as noise, but as a silence that weighs on you. You feel it in the moments when no achievement is enough, when no praise feels true, when the mirror reflects a face you recognize, but a self you've never really met. True birth begins when you stop trying to add more and start letting go. Letting go of the voices in your head that aren't yours. The stories that began before you were conscious enough to question them. The beliefs that were handed down, not discovered. This isn't about rebellion. It's about return. You're not trying to become someone else. You're trying to remember the part of you that was buried. The part that always felt a little different. A little more curious. A little more alive than the world allowed. You may not even be able to name it, but you felt it. In the quiet moments. In the pull towards something you can't describe. In the way your chest tightens when you silence your truth. That's the part of you that's still waiting to be born. Not the version the world expects. Not the persona that performs well. But the self that watches behind your eyes. That sees without effort. That knows without proof. That self doesn't need to be built. It needs to be remembered. And the only way to remember is to stop pretending you've already arrived. This remembering doesn't happen all at once. It comes in fragments, in flickers. You might catch a glimpse of it in the stillness of a morning, or in the way a song suddenly opens something inside you didn't know was closed. It's subtle, easy to miss. But if you're quiet enough, if you're honest enough, it starts showing up more often. And every time it does, something unravels, something loosens. A layer of pretending falls away, and with it, the fear that you won't survive without it. You start to see that the old self, the one you've protected, defended, performed, isn't who you are. It was a mask you wore to be accepted, to be safe. But safety built on self-abandonment isn't safety. It's a slow death. And so you begin to grieve, not just what you've lost, but what you've never given yourself permission to become. This grief is sacred. It's not weakness. It's the doorway to life. Because grief, when felt fully, becomes clarity. It shows you what mattered and what never did. It breaks the illusion that you ever had to earn your worth. And as this false self dissolves, something ancient begins to emerge. Not new, but original. The version of you that existed before fear taught you to shrink. Before success meant performance. Before love became conditional. That version doesn't need approval. It doesn't seek applause. It simply is. And it's patient. It's been waiting through all the roles you've played, through all the rooms you've shaped yourself to fit into, through all the times you stayed quiet just to belong. It's been there, watching, not judging, just waiting for you to stop running, for you to look inward instead of outward, for you to be still long enough to feel what's real. When you finally sit in that stillness, really sit, you start to feel what's always been beneath the noise. It's not a thought, not an idea. It's a presence, a knowing, a quiet, steady awareness that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, but never wavers. It doesn't speak in words, but in resonance. And the more you let go of the layers that never belong to you, the clearer it becomes. You start to feel at home, not in a place, not in a role, but in yourself. And in that moment, you're not chasing anything. You're not performing. You're simply here, fully, completely, finally. This is what it means to be born, not into the world, but into presence, into soul, into truth. And once this birth happens, you can't go back. Not because something outside forces you forward, but because something inside no longer lets you live asleep. You start to notice the sleep in others, the way they speak from pain, chase from fear, believe from conditioning, and you don't judge them. You recognize yourself in them, because you've been there too. You remember the ache of forgetting, and so you move through the world differently, slower, softer, clearer, not because you've figured it all out, but because you've remembered what matters, and you begin to honor the process. You no longer rush awakening. You let it unfold, like breath, like a wave, like night becoming dawn. You understand that birth is not an event. It's a rhythm, a spiral, a sacred undoing. Some days you feel clear, others you fall back into the fog. But now you see the fog for what it is, a teacher, not a trap. You welcome it, you sit with it, you let it pass, and when it does, you rise again. Not new, but more whole, closer to what you've always been. There is no final arrival, no ultimate version of you to unlock. That's the illusion, the lie that keeps you endlessly striving. Awakening isn't a destination, it's a homecoming, a remembering of what's always been within you, beneath the layers of survival, expectation, and noise. To be truly born is not to become more, but to become less distracted, less divided, less convinced by the performance you've perfected. And in that less, you find more than you ever imagined: depth, stillness, truth. You begin to see life not as a series of goals, but as a mirror, reflecting back your frequency, your alignment, your willingness to show up real. And slowly, that reflection shifts. Not because you force it, but because you are finally aligned with what you are. When you speak, it's not for validation. When you move, it's not for approval. When you love, it's not for safety. You do it because it's who you are. No agenda, no fear, just presence. And the world begins to feel different, not because it changed, but because you did. The same streets, the same faces, the same sounds, but they hold more color, more space, more life. You're no longer reacting, you're responding. You're no longer chasing, you're choosing. You're no longer pretending, you're present. This is what it means to be alive, to feel everything fully without running, to meet every moment as if it's sacred, because it is, because you are. So if you've ever felt like something was missing, it wasn't something out there. It was this, the you behind the you, the self beneath the story, the life waiting to begin, and now it has.